Alright, so this is my video on speeding up tomato ripening. This is especially relevant if, like me, you are looking at a frost in the near future and your tomatoes are not ripening in time. Now, my season is roughly 90 days long. Of course, it can be more or less depending on the year. You can have a late spring and an early winter, and that can really cut down on your growing season. We're a little over a week away from our projected first frost, and the weather forecast looks like there might be some really close nights this week, including tonight. I'll be covering my plants to protect them against frost, as well as for a few other reasons I'll outline later in the video. I'll also be making another video talking about frost protection and how you can extend your season. Tomatoes. Reasons your tomatoes are not maturing. If your temperature during the day is hovering below 15 degrees, and if the conditions are wet. Both of these things can cause your tomatoes to get large, but not to ripen properly. You can see this when your tomatoes are getting larger than they should for the type that they are, or are splitting, especially if they're immature green and they're splitting. For us, this year has been cold and wet. We've had over 12 inches of rain so far this summer, and we usually only average 4 to 6 inches. The weather has been cold and cloudy for the majority of the summer, and the daytime temperatures have been between 12 and 17 for the last 2 weeks. Many of my tomatoes are splitting, and I haven't been watering them at all for the last month. Unfortunately, I can't control the rain. Now, about tomatoes and temperature. Tomato fruits will not set under 12 degrees Celsius, which is about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Under 13 degrees Celsius, 55 degrees Fahrenheit, plants struggle with chill injury, will be stunted, and possibly show other signs of stress. My tomatoes, as an example, are exhibiting leaf curl. And the small fruits that are very, very green are more likely to be misshapen, ripen very slowly, and rot more quickly once they ripen, if they ripen at all. A lot of my very small immature green tomatoes are actually splitting really badly. Tomato fruits ripen best and quickest between 20 and 24 degrees Celsius, which is 68 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So if your daytimes are staying considerably cooler than that, that will slow down your ripening. Now, what can you do about it? There's a couple of methods, and I will demonstrate most of them in this video. One of the things you can do is you can reduce watering. If you've been watering as per usual and you notice your tomatoes are just getting bigger and bigger and not ripening, just start pulling back on the water. Do it gently so that you don't cause blossom end rot, which is often caused by inconsistent moisture. The second thing you can do is prune off new growing tips, as I'm doing here in this video. You can see me cutting off a tip right now. And also prune off any flower bunches that have begun to flower but have not set any fruit. These first 3 tips are most useful if you employ them 3 to 4 weeks before you expect a frost. Now, if your summer is especially warm and dry, you can probably give it an extra week before employing the pruning. The fourth thing you can do is cover your plants to trap in heat and exclude rain. You're essentially creating a mini greenhouse. If the weather is cool, below 15 degrees, or wet, you can cover them, and that will help trap in heat, will increase the temperature around the tomatoes, which will improve ripening. If it is wet but hot, you will want to leave proper ventilation so that moisture can escape, humidity especially, and also so that it doesn't get too hot under there, as tomatoes do not ripen well in an environment that is too warm. If you cannot reduce the water uptake, if your tomatoes are splitting, you can't exclude the rain, and covering them just isn't an option, you can root prune. I'll insert a video here shortly. I'll explain how to do that. Basically, what you're doing with root pruning is preventing the plant from taking up too much water. The sixth tip is to remove all slightly blushing fruit to encourage the next set of tomatoes to begin to ripen. And as a very last-ditch effort for the final week before frost, you can expose your tomatoes to sunlight. I'm doing this in the video by removing excessive foliage around my fruit, which, if you let the sun at the tomatoes, will warm up the fruits themselves. However, do not do this if you still have hot, direct sun in your forecast. This will cause sun scald and damage your tomatoes. You can ripen blushing tomatoes in a warm, dry place where you can check on them daily. Countertops are a great place. If you can't get them to blush outdoors, pick all the fruits that you think are mature green before a forecasted frost or when daytime temperatures of above 12 degrees are no longer possible. If you want to ripen them quickly, you can place all your tomatoes in a cardboard box in a single layer or another container lined with newspaper. Fruit will rot more easily if they're left against a plastic surface. Place the box in a room between 20 and 24 degrees Celsius, basically room temperature. If you're comfortable, so are the tomatoes. You can also speed up ripening with ethylene, placing one ripe fruit in the box, covering loosely with another layer of cardboard or newspaper to trap in the gas. Now, I prefer using apples, but you can use a ripe tomato. I prefer using an apple that smells really strongly. That's how you know it's giving off lots of ethylene gas. Tomatoes go from ripe to overripe very quickly, and so I prefer not to use a tomato, but you can use that in a pinch. Just check daily to remove all fruit that is beginning to get to the light red stage, as they can pass very quickly from light red to rotten. If you want to ripen only a few fruits at a time, and you have access to a cooler place, you can keep mature green and breaker stage tomatoes in the same style of box, and just take out a few at a time to ripen on the counter. Pick the most mature tomatoes to ripen and check the box every 2 or 3 days. Do not store tomatoes at any stage in the fridge if you want to eat them fresh. The flavor and texture of tomatoes is severely affected by chilling. If your tomatoes begin ripening faster, then you can use them up or process them. You can wash, score the bottoms very quickly, just a shallow cut across the bottom of the tomato in a crisscross pattern. Cut out the pit, which is the hard whitish part of the tomato just under the stem. Note that not all tomatoes have this pit. And you can freeze them in a bag or a pail in whatever quantity that is useful to you. When you want to use them up, you can pull them out of the freezer, allow them to thaw on the counter, slip off the skins, and process them as usual, or blend into a sauce. I can my tomatoes in simple, versatile recipes that can be seasoned later so that they stay sort of a blank palette that you can do anything with in the future. I tend to can a lot of whole tomatoes, which is very quick. It's a very quick process, and they can be blended up for soups and sauces. I can a lot of diced tomatoes, which takes a little bit more time, but I use this if I want a chunkier texture. So for for chili or soups, I'll use diced tomatoes. And sometimes I do also make tomato sauce. This takes more time as they tend to This takes more time as tomato sauce is de-seeded tomatoes with the skin and the pits removed. And I just don't do this often because it takes so much time, and whole tomatoes are just as useful to me. I also can a lot of salsa because we love tacos. Now let's talk about what tomato maturity looks like. So at the top left hand of the screen, you can see an immature green tomato. This is the first stage. They tend to be dull and opaque green and small. To its right is a mature green tomato. This is a cherry type, so it's not going to get any bigger. At this stage, they are opaque, but the skin is becoming shiny. Right again, so basically in the middle of your screen, there's a little cherry tomato that is at the breaker stage. At this point, they are shiny and lightening in color, have a slightly translucent skin, and if the tomatoes are a red type, they'll begin to look a little bit yellow at this stage. Next is called turning. So at the far right on the top, shiny, no longer fully green, and if it is going to be a red type of tomato, it should be starting to look a little orange. Bottom left, blushing, beginning to be mature color. If it's an orange type, it will begin to look an orange reddish color. Light red, the bottom in the middle, will be nearly fully red, but still fairly firm. I have one red cherry tomato in that picture and one black tomato, which has green stripes, and in between the green stripes, the red is starting to slowly come through. And all the way on the bottom right-hand side are two tomatoes. One is a tiny cherry, and one is another black tomato, and they should be fully colored, fruit softening slightly, and beginning to be aromatic. All right. Now I'll run through all the processes that I'm going to do on this one plant. Starting with pruning off all the growing tips. This is a lot easier to do if you do your pruning reliably throughout the year, but I find it generally gets away from me in about the middle to end of July. I'm not worried about pruning off branches at this point. I'm just pruning off the tips. And the tips are also where you'll find the majority of the flowers of the plant. So I kind of get those both in one go, just going far enough down on the tips that I am cutting back to the last fruit set branch on that growing tip. Now you can see, and it's a little bit off screen, so it's unfortunate, but I'm just cutting along the front edge of this tomato to do the root pruning. This isn't strictly necessary because I'm going to cover the plant anyway, but I thought I'd demonstrate it for you, and I also wanted to stress my plants out a little bit and encourage them. The next thing I'm doing here is removing excess foliage around my tomatoes. A couple of reasons for this is, one, I wanted to have the ability to see the fruit so I can spot it as soon as it starts ripening. The other thing is that I want the sun to be able to get at the tomatoes. Again, like I said earlier, don't do this if your sun is still really hot, as it'll cause sun scald. But this time of year for us, it's so cool that that shouldn't be a problem. You never want to totally defoliate your tomatoes or remove all foliage. It's not good for them, and you don't benefit from doing that. As you can see, I'm just checking that each branch is indeed a branch and not a fruiting stem. And I'm also checking each sucker as I'm pruning it to make sure there's no fruit on the sucker. I'm also tying the plant up, and here I'm just using the leaves of the plant itself as a tie to tie it up to the tomato ladder. The only reason I'm doing this is so that it's easier for me to wrap the plant later. It's hard to properly contain the plant if half the branches are laying on the ground. And because I'm not worried about stressing the plant, I'm not too concerned about damaging the leaves in just such a small portion of branch. As I'm going around, I'm just continuing to prune off any tips that I find as I'm working each segment of the plant. Just take your time. Relax, get into the mood, and just get a little snip happy. Not too snip happy, mind you. Really sorry for how long this video took to come out. I've been having some serious problems with my audio and video editing software is just not working. My computer is not set up for this level of processing. As I was tying these plants up, I was actually listening to a flock of geese overhead, the sure sign in northern Alberta and in most of Canada that fall has indeed arrived. So the geese are once again heading south. And you've got a big flock of them overhead. It can be quite a noisy spectacle. All right, I'm basically ready to wrap this one up. Just a few last minute prunings here. If this edit and this version actually work out, hopefully I'll have this up by Monday. If not, I just ask that you be patient with me whenever it happens. Of course, if this video doesn't come out, you won't hear me saying this, so it won't matter. So I'm just going to cover this with plastic. You've got a couple of options. You can use a lightweight plastic that you can buy in most hardware stores. This is actually a really heavy, I think it's called 6mm plastic. I like to use this if I'm going to use plastic because it's really heavy and durable and I can use it for many years. It also is not so easily moved by the wind and so it doesn't fly around quite so easily. As you can see here, it's standing fairly still on its own, even though the tomatoes next to the frame here are moving in the breeze. I'm just going to tie this up with some twine. And then we're basically done with this plant. Of course, I dropped the twine and have to pick it up again, but it's all just part of the process. I do try to tie these with sort of a slip knot kind of, or a slip loop, so that I can easily untie them if I need to, or if I need to retie them. It's a real pain if everything is knotted up and you have to unpick each knot every time you want to shift the plastic or the covering. The other option for covering would be to use a fleece. You can find fleece for this purpose in, again, most growing centers or hardware stores. You can ask specifically for it if you're not sure what you're looking for, but that's a great non-plastic alternative. However, it is not terribly durable. One last gratuitous shot of tomatoes. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful for you. If you enjoyed it or you found it useful, like, subscribe, please share. We're a very tiny channel. And we'll see ya.